Yes, because for the picture it's not good.
Please take a seat. There are a few more seats available here. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear students, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all tonight for this Geneva Challenge 2015 award ceremony. This is the second edition of our international student contest, and we are very privileged tonight to have with us two very distinguished guests, which I will introduce very briefly. The first one is former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. It's a great pleasure to see you here. And the second one is Ambassador Lacy Swing, who worked with Kofi Annan for a number of years, and who is presently the Director General of the International Organization for Migrations, and has been in that position for nearly 8 years now, after a very distinguished career in the diplomatic service of the United States of America, and then in the United Nations system as Special Representative for Western Sahara, and then for the Democratic Republic of Congo, a position that he held as an appointee of Mr. Kofi Annan. It's a great pleasure to have you as our keynote speaker tonight, because the theme of the contest this year was the theme of migrations, which was a most topical subject, and on which we are very keen on listening to the fruits of your experience and your analysis of the present situation. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. I feel very humbled to be introduced in the same voice with my former Chief Secretary General Kofi Annan and Mrs. Annan and their daughter. But it's a great honor, particularly honor, to be here with you, sir, and madam. J'aurais bien aimé faire ça en français, mais on m'a dit anglais, ça va, bon, dit okay. Ich hätte es gerne auf Deutsch auch gemacht, aber leider ist mein Wortschatz zu klein geworden. So I will be lazy and do it in English. I want to thank you, sir, and the Graduate Institute through the patronage of Ambassador Jeno Stalin, who's a friend of IOM and the UN for a long time. I want to thank you for selecting migration as the theme of this year's Geneva Challenge. I think this could hardly have been a more opportune time. In fact, it was basically a sub-theme, if you will, of the General Assembly this year. Virtually every speaker mentioned migration. We are facing the question of human mobility, the reality and the challenge of it. But I also think that it's appropriate to call this migration in a world in disarray, and I will explain. The first thing I wanted to say was that we are living in an era of unprecedented human mobility. There are more people on the move than ever before, a total of about 1 billion in our 7 billion world. About a quarter of those crossing borders and 3/4 moving within their own country. We have basically reflecting the quadrupling of the world's population in the last century, a first time that's ever occurred. And we believe that this population boom will probably level off at about 9 billion somewhere in the second half of this 21st century. So I think it's safe to say that migration is a mega trend of the 21st century. It's going to be one of the big issues. And that's because of a half dozen or so drivers of migration, forced migration in particular. I would list them all under the letter D for easy memory. One, of course, is demography. I've just mentioned that. Demand for labor. We have an aging North in need of workers, a youthful South in need of jobs. And so I think it's safe to say that our societies are going inexorably to become more multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and political wisdom would say that we should prepare our populations for that. But that also takes political courage, and that's in fairly short order these days. Distance shrinking technology, digital revolution, 300 million people connected to the internet at the turn of the century, 3 billion now heading toward 4 billion. I think if Mark Zuckerberg gets his way, it'll be 7 billion pretty soon. Degradation of the environment, in other words, climate change, desire for a better life, and then, of course, the growing socioeconomic disparities between global North and global South, and then disasters of all sorts. And that brings me to my very first point, which I would call the perfect storm, global migration trends. More people on the move than ever before. Were the world's international migrants to constitute themselves as a nation, they would be slightly smaller than Indonesia, slightly larger than Brazil. They would have a GDP pushing toward $500 billion a year, which would put them in the range of a small to medium-sized European Union member state. So this is big business, if you will. It's more than overseas development aid, twice as much, and almost as much as total foreign direct investment. So we're living, unfortunately, in a period of unprecedented forced migration. Let's take the figure of our traditional partner, UNHCR, 60 million, 20 million refugees, 40 million internally displaced persons, more people than at any other time forced to move, the most since the Second World War. Unprecedented disasters. I have not, in my long life, I've had a long life, I have not known a period quite like this. We have conflicts from the western bulge of Africa to Asia, with very few bright spots in between. You can add into that, of course, Ebola in the Mano River Union area, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea. We have instability in Mali and more recently Burkina Faso, Boko Haram in Nigeria and its neighbors, unsettled times, decade-long war in Somalia, unfinished business in Libya and Yemen as we speak. Yesterday, we evacuated 248 Somalis across the Red Sea. That's continuing on a daily basis. We have unsettled instability in both Afghanistan and Iraq. And of course, Syria is now in its 5th year of war. That would be manageable, but there are no active negotiations at present and no viable political processes of which I'm aware. I hope you wouldn't disabuse me of that idea and tell me and give me some hope. But there's nothing out there right now which gives us any hope for a short to medium term solution to any of these conflicts. And that is new for me. There's a dearth of leadership. There's a lack of political courage. There is an erosion, a significant erosion of international moral authority, a violation of international humanitarian law on all sides, and an unclear relationships among and between powers. So all of this has led to people migrating under dangerous circumstances through both the sea and in the desert. I think the number now of the ones coming into Europe is about 580,000. They're about, as of the weekend, we passed the 3,000 deaths in the Mediterranean. And these migration flows are a global phenomenon, not just in Europe. That's where the focus is. We're talking about the Red Sea. We're talking about the straits between Haiti and South Florida. We're talking about the Indian Ocean, the Andaman Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and others that I could name. So it's a global issue that we have to get our minds around. Now, the other thing I would say is that we're in a period of unprecedented anti-migrant sentiment. It's based on a number of things. It's based on the 2008-2009 economic downturn, fear of loss of jobs. It's based on the post 9/11 security syndrome, in which everyone could potentially be bringing ill into the country through a terrorist activity. It's based on the fear of the loss of identity, but we have to move that debate not to identity, but to a question of values and interests. The fact that someone doesn't look like you or speak as you do doesn't mean they cannot share the same values. There's an unprecedented political malaise that I just mentioned, which adds up to a perfect storm, or the globalization of indifference, as Pope Francis recently described it. But it is entirely within our capacity with political will to weather this storm, however turbulent or long. IOM's thesis is that migration is not a problem to be solved, it is a human reality to be managed. So it moves it from a negative to a positive and takes wisdom on our part. We also believe that large-scale migration, or human mobility, the preferred term, is inevitable because of the driving forces I mentioned, particularly demography. It is necessary if skills are to be available, jobs to be filled, and economies to flourish, and it is absolutely desirable if we have policies that keep pace with the realities. Second point, weathering the storm. How do we respond to migration challenges? First of all, I think we have to recognize these human realities and put them in perspective. I would not make light of the challenge that 580,000 migrants in Europe pose. But I would also remind everybody that they're coming into a population area of more than 500 million. To manage these mixed flows, then, we need to avoid what I guess Javier Solano described as refugee amnesia, both historical and contemporary. IOM and UNHCR were both founded in 1951 precisely to take countless numbers of Europeans ravaged by World War II to safe havens and a new life. The 200,000 Hungarians who fled Hungary in 1956, we're on the 60th anniversary now, fled to open arms in Austria and Yugoslavia. The contemporary amnesia consists of refusal to recognize that Ethiopia has been host to 700,000 refugees for many years, Kenya to 400,000, and Sudan to 200,000, and a little country with a small population, Lebanon, 4.5 million people, is now host to more than 1 million Syrian migrants. So we need perspective, I think, in order to manage the situation. Secondly, we need new migration policies in what I call a high road scenario, so that we keep pace with change. The objectives would be, first of all, to respect the human rights of all migrants, meaning at least temporary protective status for everyone. Secondly, to address the root causes and drivers of migration. And thirdly, to promote safe, orderly mobility. There are many ways to go about it. We need more resettlement countries. We need larger resettlement quotas. We need more legal avenues of migration, because as it stands, unconsciously, we are subsidizing the smuggling trade. We are pushing people into the hands of smugglers because there's no other way to get into a country and start your new life. Dialogue and partnerships are needed. That's why I'm very pleased with the Horn of Africa Migration Initiative, the Khartoum process, the Rabat process, the fact that the European Union will be meeting with the African Union at Valletta on the 11th and 12th of November. Very good. We need more of that. The fact that we're having dialogue regularly now in Brussels and Luxembourg under the Luxembourg presidency to try to find solutions to the large migration flows. And then thirdly, we need communication. Governments need to be conducting public education, public information, awareness-raising campaigns that will help the people to understand what is afoot, why so many people are migrating, and what can be done to ensure that they are well received and given an opportunity to integrate into society and to make their contribution. Because let us not kid ourselves. Migration historically has been overwhelmingly positive. My own country, the United States, has been built on the backs and with the brains of migrants and continues to be so. Many other countries had the same experience. The comprehensive approach is needed. We need to think in terms of migration as a whole, looking at migrant labor needs, circular migration, resettlement, etc. So let me move then quickly to my third point, which, sorry, I got one more point on this one I'll say. We have in some ways squandered about 27 billion euros since the year 2000. 11 billion that went to deport people who could have been sent home under a dignified return program with a couple thousand euros in their pocket to start life again and to reduce the likelihood that they would return immediately, and 16 billion that was spent that migrants have paid to smugglers. That $27 billion could have been spent, I believe, in a more fruitful manner. This would have protected the dignity of the people, it would have nurtured bilateral relations, it would have promoted development and durable solutions. So my conclusion, my third part of these remarks, are simply to talk about the calm after the storm. And so I would leave you with 2 or 3 challenges, which I think are essential to succeeding in this highly mobile world in disarray. First of all, we have to work together to find a way to change the migration narrative. At present, it's toxic. Migration has become a negative word. That defies historical definition. We know it's been positive. We're trying through social media to try to highlight the contributions that migrants make. No, they're not angels, but I know of 2 or 3 at least of my nationals who aren't angels either. So I think we need to keep this in perspective. So we need to change that migration narrative so that the public discourse becomes a more historically correct discourse, namely positive. So that's number one. We have to destroy the stereotypes. Migrants are, in fact, agents of development, but they won't be recognized that if we take the stereotypes, they're coming to take our jobs, they're probably bringing disease in, they're probably bringing a criminal element in, all of these things that aren't true, but we have to find a way to restore that by letting migrants tell their own story. The second challenge is linked to the first, and it's equally difficult, which is that we have to learn to manage diversity. The demographics and the aging industrialized world, together with other driving forces I mentioned, mean that the countries of Europe and other industrialized countries are going to need migrants at all skill levels. Many of them are going to come in and do the dirty, difficult, and dangerous jobs that our nationals don't want to do. They will move up the ladder, but initially they're not immune from taking those jobs and making their contribution. So I think, as I said, we will inexorably become more cultural, multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious. And to succeed in managing this diversity is going to require courage and political leadership, more public education, more dialogue. It means moving the debate from one of identity, in which we're put off because the person doesn't look like we do, they dress differently, they speak differently, etc., to one of sharing common interests and common values. And so our multilateral approach at IOM is to involve everybody, including, very importantly, the mayors. The mayors get it much better than the national politicians. They know they have to provide security, they have to provide shelter, they have to provide jobs, they have to help integrate these people into their society. And so we're holding a major conference on migrants and cities in the coming days. The third challenge is somewhat related to the first two, and that is to try to formulate and implement a balanced, comprehensive, long-term migration policy that, I'm going to invent a phrase here, that will conjugate the conundrum of national sovereignty on the one hand and national and personal freedom on the other hand. National sovereignty and personal freedom. How do you come up with a policy that respects both of those. We'll never get it 100% right, but we have to try to have a policy that fits in nicely between those parameters. And we have to conjugate the conundrum or the paradox of national security versus human security. We have to work with, make sure that our border control is humanitarian border control. We have never given enough public credit to the 6 neighbors of Libya and the 4 neighbors of Syria, who to this day have kept their borders open. When the High Commissioner and I flew down to Libya, to the border in March of 2011, migrant workers were coming out of there at a rate of about 6,000 a day. And Tunisia's a relatively small country physically, and it was really just overpowering the local communities who, of their own goodness of their hearts, were feeding these people. And we began to sort of decongest the area and fly people home. Ultimately, 250,000 migrants flown home to 54 countries. But at great expense, they kept their borders open. Water-poor Jordan, 10 million liters of water a day just for the refugee camps. Lebanon, more than 1 million Syrians on their terrain there, competing for some of the same services and jobs. And Turkey, now the largest refugee country in the world with 2 million. So we have to find a migration policy that will deal with what seem to be paradoxes, but both of which have to be addressed. So migration is as old as humankind. We're going to continue to resort to migration as a coping mechanism, as a means of making our contribution. It's the oldest poverty reduction strategy in the world. I think it goes back to John Kenneth Galbraith at Harvard, but I believe it. So we turn migration challenge into an opportunity, and to do this, we have to have good migration governance, a broad, durable consensus among a wide constituency, and coherent, coordinated policies among partners. I think, Mr. Chairman, that's about the best I can do. I've kept you too long, told you too much, but I hope that this will, you'll find this of some interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for this great overview and for this very strong message. I think you accepted to answer a few questions. Yeah, okay, so.
I think I had intentionally forgotten that. Thank you.
So the floor is open for people in the audience. Here. You want to? If you can introduce yourself and keep your question as short as possible.
Yes.
Thank you.
My name is Jerry Hush. I'm a sociologist. I'm affiliated with the University of Warwick. I'm focused on data for this complexity. And I'm actually going to ask you a hypothetical. Because you're establishing that there's a paradox and we need to really deal with this in terms of policy creation. So I'm wondering, has there been any discussion about the very nature of the nation state? The fact that the identities that you're talking about are actually, it's a very new concept to have a nation state and have a passport. And human migration is much older than that concept. Is there any way perhaps out of this conundrum by redefining what we call borders?
Come to the academia.
It's a very important but very difficult question. I think, let me come at it in a very general way, and perhaps not, I might not be able to answer it at all, but what I think is, I think that perhaps the silver lining to what's otherwise a very dark cloud right now is that we may be at a defining moment on issues such as this, that we don't presently have the policies, and therefore we don't have the mindset to deal with human mobility We can create a WTO in charge of the free movement of capital, goods, and services, but those who are responsible for that free movement of capital, goods, and services are people, and we have nothing about the free movement of people. And I'm far from me to be preaching open borders here tonight. I'm not. But I do think that we need to look at migration as human mobility rather than, it's no longer moving from point A to point B. You know, I mean, I have a migration family. My wife is from Asia. My son has lived for the last 23 years in Cape Town when I was ambassador there. My daughter's a peacekeeper in Afghanistan. Her 10-year-old son is in Manhattan. So, you know, this is more now the rule than the exception. And but we aren't quite ready for that yet. And I don't quite know how we get there. I think the dialogue has begun. We have a good dialogue in the Global Forum on Migration and Development, which was created under Secretary General Kofi Annan. And his special representative is still doing the job, Peter Sutherland, doing a great job. We've got a lot of regional processes. I think we're starting in small ways. The 15-nation ECOWAS grouping in West Africa, for example, they've eliminated all visas. We think that, for example, if you had more south-south migration, it's about 37% now. It's almost equal to south-north. If we had more of that, eliminate more visas and so on in Africa, many Africans would migrate within Africa, which is what they'd like to do. So we have to come at it probably piecemeal. I don't think there's any grand concept out there, though. You now have a book that's just come out, like If Mayors Rule the World by Benjamin Barber. I think he's at New York University or Columbia, beginning to look at, there are different ways of doing things. So I don't quite know how we get our minds around it. I certainly don't have answers for you, but the question is very pertinent. Are our policies adequate? Are our old... I think, frankly, that the nation state is already changing before our very eyes, particularly in composition. I mean, there are very few countries that don't rely to some extent on migration. So I think the debate is still to be had.
Hello, my name is Rezvan Prejbanu. I'm managing director of Regiconia Switzerland, a small startup. And I thank Switzerland because I was myself a political refugee in the 80s, fleeing communist dictatorship. But I have a question. Some weeks ago, there was the CEO of Daimler-Benz quoting that he was very happy to have hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees because they're high skilled and can work for competitive, I quote, competitive wages at Daimler. So my question is, why he is not taking care about the 3 billion German unemployed people, because these people are also skilled? And my second, it's twofold question, is why do United States and Gulf countries are taking so few of the global Syrian refugees, contrary to the European Union?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me answer the last part first, because I remembered. I may have to ask you for the first part again. No, I think, and I'm not here to defend my country or any other. I think the point is that, generally speaking, the U.S. is year in and year out taking more refugees than the rest of the world together, which still holds true today. They have increased, President Obama announced an increase from 70,000 to 85,000 this year and 100,000 in 2017. And I've heard recently that those numbers could go as high as 100,000 next year and 150,000 in 2017. So it's still not enough, and we should do more, but that's where it stands right now. Frankly, the other thing that weakens our request to get more countries to accept Syrian refugees has to do with the fact that 4 countries in the EU now have said they will have no part of it, and a 5th one has abstained. So if you have 5 out of 28 countries that aren't playing ball, it weakens those of us who are trying to get others to help out, as you're suggesting. I was in Chile 10 days ago, and I met with President Michelle Bachelet, and she had just announced that they were going to take a number of Syrian families. They have the second largest Palestinian community in the world there already. And so I thought that was very good. Brazil has come forward, Venezuela's come forward, and the U.S. came forward. I think there will be others. But we need to see a little more institutional unity in Brussels to make this happen. The first question related to taking jobs from those who are unemployed, if I understood correctly? Is that more or less it? I think, frankly, a lot of the unemployment in most of our industrialized countries is structural unemployment. Most of these people coming in, even though if they're highly skilled, are prepared to take a job below their educational or expertise level. That's what we call de-skilling. Haitian doctors are driving taxis in Miami, for example, but eventually they survive and they work their way up the line. It's the way, sort of the survivor mentality for what I call desperation migration. So I think that these countries have to work this out. And I think, frankly, the private sector needs to be much more involved in helping governments to understand what are the labor market needs? What are the skills we need? How many can we tolerate in what skill areas? And then you bring a little more order into the process. No question.
Let's take two last questions first.
Mr. Ambassador, thanks for your talk. How about promoting success stories? First of all, have there been success stories in this migration crisis around the world? And I mean, I can think of at least one. And have you given any thought to promoting these to sort of spread the word that this actually can be a positive development?
Right. Well, I have with me a couple of my colleagues from the Media and Communications Unit. They've got several programs going. One's called I Am a Migrant, with success stories. What's the other one called, Joel? Migrant Heroes. We also have a Migrants' Voices section in our annual council meeting every year. But we need to do much, much more. But it's quite clear. Let me give you an example. When Mo Farah is discussed, Mo Farah, British will not tell you that he's a Somali. He's Brit. Didn't he win 3 gold medals at the Olympics? My old friend Dikembe Mutombo, the 7'2" DRC basketball player, when Dikembe came here to be part of our Migrants' Voices, everybody wanted to talk to him. But he's an American citizen now. Nobody thinks of him as Congolese. He's American. And Americans will say, he's an American. Wasn't he a big star? So I think the more stories we get out there, the more people will realize that in effect, they can make their contribution, and they will. But we need to do much, much more through social media and otherwise. And we need to have more leaders speaking out on the contribution. How many members of their cabinet? The mayor of Rotterdam came from Morocco. I mean, these are stories that need to be told. And you're right to pose the question. That is part of the challenge right now, to change the narrative. That was unfair. You're a colleague of mine from the State Department.
Erica Acquafil. I actually go to school at Washington University in St. Louis, but I'm studying here with the School for International Training, and I'm writing a capstone piece on migration, and I just wanted to get your opinion on what is happening currently with the Schengen Agreement. I'm actually looking at the legal policies and how the Schengen Agreement is basically being suspended, and how the differences in border controls in the European Union, that is apparently something that is supposed to be worldwide across the European Union and have a set policy that is for all member states, but each state obviously has taken it into individual hands. And how do you think this is going to play a role in the future, and for future organizations that are, or unions such as the European Union, the African Union, and countries that are trying to do things together, but obviously it's failing? Well, clearly the Schengen arrangement is a very, very positive arrangement, and I think it's in no danger of being abandoned. There have been times when they've used a clause within the Schengen agreement temporarily to suspend it. I remember this happened once before. France and a couple other countries were asking it to be suspended because of the large arrival in Lampedusa and Sicily. But I think these are short-term things. I think the agreement itself I would hope would continue. I was co-chairing the
regional economic, the World Economic Forum, the regional version in Jakarta back in April, and they were talking about creating a new ASEAN economic community. The founder of AirAsia, Tony Fernandez, spoke up first and said, "Well, how are we going to do that without a Schengen arrangement? Because you can't have visas for 10 countries." And then I spoke up and said, "Yeah, I think though, if you're going to have 10 countries in a market of 650 million people, you're going to have to give some consideration to labor mobility. So that's going to be very important. And the more arrangements you get where you can, this goes back to your border question, where borders become fairly meaningless, the better off you'll be. I think in much more being challenged right now is the Dublin Accord. And I think a lot of people feel that's in deep trouble, and some people don't think it will survive. I'm not an expert, I don't know, and I wouldn't want to be impolite. Say, okay. I think my answers are so long, it scared more questions away, and I apologize. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We now move forward with our award ceremony. We have student teams impatiently waiting to know who has won. And before giving an answer to them, I would like to invite Professor Martina Viarengo to come to the podium. Professor Viarengo is the chair of the steering committee, composed of a few professors of the Graduate Institute who have done all the work to select the candidates and now the winners, and I would like to thank her and her colleagues for all this job. Thank you.
Mr. Annan, Ambassador Stelen, Ambassador Swing, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to give you a short overview of the Advancing Development Goals contest. So the ADG is an international contest for graduate students. The objective is to gather contributions that are both theoretically grounded and also offer pragmatic solutions to a relevant international development problem. Contributions are the result of an interdisciplinary collaboration between 3 to 5 master students from anywhere in the world. The topic for this second edition is return migration and socioeconomic development. As Ambassador Swing pointed out, global migration is one of the most significant phenomena shaping our society. And global migration patterns have become more complex. So in this context, consistent and comprehensive evidence on the consequences of large-scale migratory flows on shaping political and economic institutions is still missing. And this is particularly relevant for developing countries today, highlighting this complex relationship between diversity coming from migration and prosperity. An increasing area of research is now focusing on understanding the impact of migration on the development of sending countries. So we welcome an investigation of these issues through 3 main channels, as identified by recent research: investment, knowledge transfer, and social impact. We launched the contest in November 2014 with a call for proposals and allowed 4 months for registrations. At the end of May, we received submissions from 168 students divided into 45 teams. This year, we observed a significant increase in the participation of students from universities in developing countries. We received submissions from students from 41 different nationalities, with about 62% of students coming from universities in either low-income or middle-income countries. By looking at the total number of submissions, 25 disciplines were involved, ranging from history to anthropology, from geography to law. Submissions were first examined by the Academic Steering Committee and then by the jury panel. The Academic Steering Committee shortlisted 12 projects, and then the jury panel selected the 3 finalist teams. The evaluation criteria include relevance of the research question, that is, the ability to identify a real-world problem, not just an interesting research question, thus addressing this disconnect that we often observe between academic and policy challenges. Analytical rigor, as well as feasibility of the proposal, including potential for implementing the initiative in other countries facing similar challenges. On behalf of the Graduate Institute, I would like to thank our jury panel. This is a mix of academics, representatives of international organizations, and global policymakers. So the jury panel is chaired by Ambassador Stalin and includes Mrs. Maria Luisa Silva, who is the director of the UNDP office in Geneva and who recently joined us. Professor Pano Podvara, who is the director of the IFO Center for International Institutional Comparisons and Migration Research and professor of economics at University of Munich. Professor Svetozar Vajak, who is the associate professor in international history at the London School of Economics and the academic director of the LSE Ideas, a center for the study of international affairs, diplomacy and strategy at the London School of Economics. Let me thank also my colleagues here at the Graduate Institute, who are members of the steering committee and who devoted much time and energy to the contest. Professor Ravi Bhavnani and Professor Felipe Calvao. Of course, I'd like to thank also my predecessor, Professor Gilles Carbonnier, who has been a great mentor. And I also would like to acknowledge that Professor Vincent Chetaille, who is the director of the Global Migration Center here at the Graduate Institute, and Professor Jean-Louis Arcan, who is the director of the Center for Finance and Development, provided general support at different stages. Many others, of course, contributed to the contest, and we cannot name all of them. But let me thank Laurence Algara, who is the executive assistant to Professor Burin, who has provided continuous support, as well as Nia Dopa, who is coordinator of the contest and also one of our PhD students, who has been dealing with the daily management and coordination of the contest in these last few months, as well as the communications and public relations unit of the Graduate Institute. After a long deliberation in July, the jury selected the 3 finalist teams. The 3 teams are here with us today, and they were invited to present their work in front of the jury panel, members of the Academic Steering Committee, and the public. I will now invite them to come here and give us a short presentation of their project proposal. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. We are a joint team from the LSE and the Architectural Association, but before we give a very brief introduction to ourselves and our project, Vital Networks, we would just like to thank everyone whose hard work has made it possible for us to be standing here today. So a special thank you to Mr. Annan and Ambassador Stalin, the patrons of the Advancing Development Goals contest. A special thank you to Ambassador Swing, whose very candid talk was a great start to this evening. Members of the jury and the Academic Steering Committee, thank you. And of course to Nea, who has been dealing with all of our email requests and day in, day out correspondence. Thank you very much for your patience. So as a team, we are particularly interested in challenging international development problem solving by combining the research focus of social science with a more design thinking approach that we bring in from from architecture. So with the vital networks, we were trying to tackle medical brain drain, which we see as a particularly complex problem of international development because it intersects a lot of conflicting issues: an individual's right to seek better prospects abroad, the interests of developing countries themselves, as well as the market incentives often driven by what's going on in OECD countries. Our project is a system of international telemedicine that at its heart tries to allow migrant health workers who have trained in the developing world and worked in the OECD to be in a professional sense in two places at once. We'd love to talk more about our project afterwards, but we're trying to keep this brief. So I'll just briefly say that going on from this project, Dave and Nathan are going to be continuing their studies. David is playing a leading role on the editorial board with the Palestinian Youth Network for Citizenship and Reform, and he's doing further research into migration and the anthropology of development. This year, Nathan is conducting research on the global supply networks behind contemporary megacities, and he has a special focus on storytelling through digital media, film, and code. Marielle is currently a programs and communications intern at Reboot in New York, which is a social impact firm that is dedicated to inclusive development and accountable governance. And I am currently working as a cybersecurity research analyst with a company called Darktrace, which has pioneered machine learning models for corporate network security. So clearly we are a very diverse group with diverse interests, but we've really enjoyed this experience. We feel so privileged to be here and have this opportunity, and we would really encourage anyone who's thinking of taking up the Geneva Challenge to definitely do so, because it is worth it. Thank you very much.
Good evening. So we'd like to start by thanking the Graduate Institute for hosting this competition. Like the other group mentioned, we're honored to be here presenting our proposal in front of such an esteemed audience. So we're here from Columbia University, and we presented a policy proposal titled The Ethics of Remitting, Building a Normative Framework for the Discussion of Remittances on Migration and Development. I just misread our title. I'm going to reread it. The Ethics of Remitting, Building a Normative Framework for the Inclusion of Remittances in Policy Discussions on Migration and Development. So we began our project by identifying the most pertinent issues related to return migration and analyzing what was missing from the current multilateral system concerning migrant issues. So the treatment of remittances stood out due to their impressive implications for international development. And the biggest challenge we faced was trying to come up with a feasible policy solution for a very ad hoc system. As we wrote in our paper, there are some regional trends, but by and large, countries have individualized systems governing remittances. There is already a lot of discussion taking place on the high cost of transfer fees, but what didn't exist was a model tax policy, and what was unclear was the role of developed countries in supporting the flow of remittances. What we propose is that developed countries hosting migrant workers offer a tax credit on money sent as remittances up to a certain cap. The roadmap to achieve this progressive goal is twofold: a change in norms and a change in practice. We use the Migration Convention as a policy tool to achieve our goal through text amendments to articles related to remittances and the issuance of a general comment. So central to our argument, and what we enjoyed most throughout the different cycles of our project, was working with an ethics approach to guiding policy solutions. We were excited to find the emphasis on moral and philosophical arguments could bind our different competencies and worldviews together. So each of us brought a different area of study into the discussion, which was beneficial in analyzing the issue from various angles. Isabella brought connections to the multilateral institutions. David highlighted the question from the point of view of international security, and Olga commented on the perspective of economic and political development, and I brought a human rights-based approach. So to some extent, reflecting our different background and interests, we were adamant about designing a proposal that could support the varied work that's taking place all over the world by providing a basic minimum expectation of what is acceptable in the transfer of remittances, while at the same time not hindering the innovative programs already in place. And when it comes to implementation of our proposal, the project attempts to communicate directly with the current major multilateral fora, such as financing for development, the SDGs, public-private partnerships, community pooling. It does so while looking at international law, banking systems, national governance structures. The project's strongest suit is its capability of looking at different levels of actors engaged in the remittance system and providing solutions that take all of them into account. So we're honored that the Geneva Challenge saw potential in our research and our policy recommendations of turning that into an innovative solution for a global issue. And we thank you for your attention.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. As with the other groups, we would love to thank the Geneva Challenge for giving us the opportunity to speak in front of an international audience, something that many of us have not yet experienced. And I'd like to discuss our project, which is actually pretty small scale. It is assisting the reintegration of Filipino returned migrants through mobile technology, so a very accessible form of technology. The Philippines is known as one of the countries that sends many of its citizens abroad to work in various capacities. And many of our citizens are unfortunately not professionals, 22.7% are. And we tried to ask ourselves, how could we use return migration for development, and what are the capacities that return migrants bring with them, and what kind of situations are they in that we could use towards development? And we discovered, while we asked ourselves these questions, that the Philippines does in fact have many programs that are not known to many of the return migrants because of the disparate nature. They are offered by both public institutions and by private institutions. And me, myself, as a return migrant, did not know of any of these programs. And we thought that we could use an accessible form of technology, which is either an application or a USSD code, which can be used with a normal cell phone, even some of the older ones from maybe 10 or 15 years ago, so that it's accessible to vast sectors of the population. And what does this application or USSD code contain? Well, we basically wanted to make it an integrated return migrant assistant, or IRMA. So it's basically something that you can access on your mobile phone and that has a female-sounding name like Siri and other programs such as that. It is a centralized mobile-based application that can effectively communicate all assistance services, whether private or public, available to Filipino return migrants. And there are two components, as I mentioned before. There's an application where you can inform yourself about what projects, the government has on return migrants, whether it's skill trainings for those who are de-skilled. In other countries, many of our college graduates do in fact decide to work as domestic helpers simply because they need to provide money for their families and remain so until they retire. And I think that in order to give them hope that there is something for them in our country, we need to reach out to them in every way possible. And there are many opportunities for this. The government has the policy framework for it, which encourages cooperation between different agencies, and there is very high mobile penetration in the Philippines, and almost everyone has access to a cell phone. And there are several other projects that have been implemented successfully with mobile technology, including weather applications for farmers. And we really wanted to bring that to the grassroots level and make all these programs accessible to those who really need it, and make the government understand what the needs of return migrants are. In terms of the implementation of our project, local government units have expressed interest, and so as a senator in the Philippines, so we're going to try to pilot it and have discussions with the various stakeholders involved so that we're informed of their needs, and they can tell the government more clearly what it is they want. And so we're one step closer to achieving that goal, and I'm very happy about that. And I'd like to introduce my team last of all. My name is Frankie, and I'm doing a second master's degree in international relations at the University of the Philippines. And I contributed more to the theoretical and practical part of the project because I have personal experience as a return migrant. And Ivan here is doing his master's in Philippine studies with a major in development studies, and he brought a development aspect to our program and tried to reach out to many of the other sectors that are not often covered in the discourse on migrants. And Janina Tan is doing her master's in Asian studies, major in China studies, and she contributed the management and technical aspects of our project. And I suppose that's it. I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you very much for listening.
Now that the suspense has become unbearable, let me invite for the presentation of the prize Ambassador Jenő Stelin, a very long time friend of the Graduate Institute, the person who had this brilliant idea and who generously helped us to implement it. So thank you so much, Jenő.
Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Annan, Ambassador Swing, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, I know what my job is. My job is to announce the winners. But let me start with a few personal remarks. But don't be scared. I won't keep you long. Let me first and foremost thank Ambassador Swing for his highly topical speech. The challenges his organization is faced with are challenges all of us are confronted with in one way or another. All of us have to take a stand as individuals and as citizens on how to respond to worldwide migration, or I should better say now, human mobility, in an ethical and human way. In a way that is at the same time taking into account the practical possibilities and natural limits of societies and countries, but as you have said, also the enormous potential it represents. This year's contest looks at a very specific and particular phenomenon of migration, namely at the role of return migration. In this part of the world, in the industrial world, I think we should take into account to a greater extent than this is usually done, the impact migration has on the economic development of the home countries of migrants. Just remember that remittances, and I think it has been said before, but you can never stress it enough, represent 3 times the amount, at least 3 times, the amount of official development assistance from industrial countries to less developed countries. What a great contribution to the growth of those countries, not compromised either by corruption or similar problems. Let's leave at that. We have been given deep insight tonight and plenty of food for thought. There is not much else to being added. Thank you, Ambassador Swing. And now we will proceed to the announcement of the winners of this year's contest. And in doing that, I'm happy and privileged to be able to rely on the support and assistance of one of the best known and respected international figures, Mr. Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the UN and honorary patron of this contest, who has graciously accepted to hand over the certificates and prizes to the winning teams. With his help, I hope I will be able to get through this procedure without too many hiccups. But more importantly, his presence shows the personal interest he has in your projects and similar projects. And that will hopefully inspire you to continue and to remain engaged in issues of sustainable development. I will proceed with the help of Mr. Annan, as they do on TV shows and in Hollywood, and start with the winners of the third prize. The winner and recipient of a check of Swiss francs 2,500 is the team from Columbia University, the ethics of remitting. Congratulations, you have submitted a great project. And be aware, all of you, this is not the third best team out of 3. It is the third best team out of 45 valid submissions we have received. Let's now move to the second and first prize. Let me add that the jury had to take a decision that was difficult, and we had a long discussion. But finally, the prize of the second submission and check of Swiss francs 5,000 goes to the team of the London School of Economics and Political Science, Vital Networks. Congratulations to you. And you are all smart enough to have deduced from what I have just announced that the first prize and the check of Swiss franc 10,000 goes to the University of the Philippines. Congratulations and thank you very much. You have helped me a lot. Thanks again to all of you who have participated in this second round of this contest. That contest, we didn't know where it will lead us when we started it a year ago. We will do our best to make all 3 projects known over our website and through other means. And now, we all know after the match is before the match. I'm thus happy to announce the topic of next year's SDGs contest. The Academic Steering Committee has decided that next year's topic should be the environmental impact of urbanization. We think not only of environment in the strict sense, but also urbanization's impact on societies, the fact that it induces conflicts, disasters, health, and much more. Please tell your friends and fellow students to participate in this contest and to thus contribute to the global effort to improve the quality of life of people living in urban areas. You students, and I address myself more particularly to the students of the Graduate Institute and others, you belong to the young generation, and most of you live in cities. And you have a direct interest in making our lifestyle more sustainable, since you will feel the consequences of how we live today, much more so than I myself will. And with due respect, Ambassador Swing, we will not live to see the effects of it. And in addition, you belong to an elite, which implies a particular responsibility. So please do get involved, do interfere, do get engaged, even if you do not participate in next year's contest. We are now approaching the end of this ceremony. Before I let you go, I would, for my part, like to address some words of thanks. It has already been done, but it can never be done often enough, to the Academic Steering Committee, to the jury, to Professor Burin and his crew for their support and continuous and active interest in this contest, in which we hope to improve even better. And last but not least, to all of you, for having participated in this ceremony and thus having shown interest and hopefully support for an enterprise that has, as I said, begun only last year, but is intended to continue as long as it is considered useful and helpful in promoting and realizing SDGs objectives. And for that, one needs tenacity and stamina, and I hope you've got it. Thank you.